What's up, wizards? My name's Matt. I'm here to be talking about TypeScript tips and tricks for VS Code. And I've got a little bit of a treat for you today. Thank you so much, Olivia, by the way, for that wonderful intro. I am apparently the TypeScript wizard. And I basically last year or so, I quit my job to become a full-time TypeScript educator. And so here I am in my study at VS Code Day. What a journey, eh? I have some cool stuff to show you. And let's go right into the code. When you've got a type problem in TypeScript, your IDE is basically your only friend. It's the only one that can give you advice. When you have issues like there is so little surface area with TypeScript to be able to actually understand and introspect what's happening in your types. And I'm going to teach you today how you can use your IDE and especially VS Code to full advantage to be able to get the most out of it. Now, I'm full-time TypeScript educator. You should check out totaltypescript.com, which is my course. And I am like kind of quite a practical dude. We're going to be looking at extremely practical tips that you can take away. And this is split up into two different stages. We're going to be talking about the absolute basics first. We're going to be talking about the stuff that you need to know to be able to get good with TypeScript in VS Code. The first one, obviously, autocomplete. Then we're going to look at hovering. Then we're going to look at this cool tsconfig option called no error truncation. But for the advanced folks, I've got some stuff coming here too that's going to make you a little bit excited too. But advanced folks, stick around. Like, you're going to learn some stuff from the basics, and beginners, you're going to learn some stuff from the advanced stuff too. Ready? Let's take a look. Let's take a look at some code. We have some code here, which is, it says, okay, we've got an object where we have a name of John and an age of 30. And we have a function here that only accepts John, right? Only John is allowed to be passed into this function. And we have this name, John, and that's a literal in TypeScript. It's not just any old string here. That would actually work fine. We have an actual John needing to be passed in. And so this will work fine if we say only accepts John. I've got a brand new mechanical keyboard, by the way, so like my typing has been screwed up. So apologies if I make more mistakes than usual. But we've got only accepts John. This seems to work fine, but why isn't this working? Object.name, that is John, right? Why wouldn't that be working? Okay, so you come across this as a beginner. How are you going to get from point A to point B? Step one is scream about it on Twitter or go to your local Discord, your local neighborhood Discord, and shout about it. But let's see if we can do some steps before we bother the Twitterati. We have this object up here. Now, what I do when I have a type error is, first of all, I hover over the error itself, right? Argument of type string is not assignable to parameter of type John. Okay, so that's interesting. It seems like that to a TypeScript beginner, this looks a little bit weird. Why is that being inferred as string instead of the actual John? Because if we put John in there, it works. So if we hover over this, we're not only seeing the error here, we're also seeing a little bit of hover information, a little bit of introspection based on what TypeScript thinks object.name is. You can see here we have a property, name, string. Okay, let's take a look at the object now. What happens if we hover there? Now we get the entire object kind of brought up. So we can see now the object has name, string, age, number. So you see the difference, right? We're hovering the property or hovering the entire object. How about if we hover the function? Well, hover the function, that kind of brings up what TypeScript thinks the type of this function is. Currently, this function returns nothing, so it's going to return void. If we return 1, 2, 3 from inside it, then it's going to return a number instead. So as you can see, hovering different stuff tells you what TypeScript is inferring from the runtime code you have there. And TypeScript is pretty clever. It's going to actually dive into your runtime code and try to infer as much as you can. We don't need to infer this as, let's say, name string and age number. It's going to infer that automatically. So I've done that manually, but I can actually just remove this. And now, it just infers it. So why isn't this working? We still haven't got to the bottom of this. Well, this is expecting John, but actually it's receiving string. So the way that we would get around this is actually by using something called asConst, because technically this object.name could be reassigned. We could say object.name, there we go, and equals, let's say equals Matt. Oh, this keyboard is killing me. But so TypeScript can't actually infer that John is always going to be John. He might change his name by default. That might not be a thing outside the UK. But by marking it as const, what we're doing is we're saying this object now, how do we see how it's changed? Well, we hover over the object. Now each name and age is read only. And instead of being inferred as string, it's being inferred as its literal. So as const basically says this can never be reassigned. You are John forever, you poor soul. And now object.name, if we hover over the .name, that's now being inferred as John. Hovering, super crucial lesson. On to number 2, autocomplete. So many people, when they start out in TypeScript or just in JavaScript in general, don't know how to manually trigger autocomplete. Autocomplete will trigger, let's say here we're creating a document.create element, we're creating a div. Yay, who doesn't love a div? We've got a div, and what we can do here is we can check out its properties. Let's say we need to access, I don't know, some property on it, and we go dot. And suddenly we have all of these different things down here. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. You can kind of scroll in this thing and take a look. Okay, we can take a look on submit, hover over that, we get a type definition. But sometimes you get to this point and you don't know how to manually trigger this. How do we actually get the options available to us? Well, we can do control space, not command space, control space. I'm on a Mac, but control space. And so suddenly we get all of this stuff available to us. And it's not only that, we can even look inside here and I wonder what types of elements I'm allowed to create here. Ooh, look at this, tons of string literals available to me. And I can just go and look at create element small. I don't actually know what a small element is. That's quite lovely. Let's change this back to div, just in case you get panicked there. I wonder what strings this takes. I wonder what strings this takes. Well, autocomplete inside, and we get the full picture. Autocomplete, absolutely critical to understand. Let's go to one that you might not have heard of or might not understand. You have this enormous object here, property with a massively long name, super long name. When I try to actually figure out an error for this, let's say this is erroring here. Property with an exceedingly long name 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 more, and then you have this 10 here is not assignable to type string. Okay, that's a little confusing. I dislike this so much that on every single project, I'm trying to get rid of it. I don't mind long TypeScript errors, as long as they're not truncated like this. This truncation always feels really off to me. And what I like to do is I like to see the entire type when I'm doing this object. And so the best way to do that is you can go to your tsconfig.json, and you can add no error truncation true. Save the file, go back up to here, hover over this, then look at that. Suddenly we get the entire beautiful long names of these properties all out there, and we can see exactly what the shape of it is. There's another little thing here too, which is sometimes you'll change a config option or something will not feel right. And sometimes the best solution is just to go Command-Shift-P and restart your TS server. This is a super common thing. And we should talk about this too. The reason that TypeScript is able to infer stuff in your VS Code at all is because it's running this little TypeScript server in the background, looking at all the changes that you're making in your code and reacting accordingly. So when TypeScript or when VS Code says, I wonder if this passes in TypeScript, I wonder what errors it needs to show, then it goes and asks the TS server and it grabs it. But for now, let's do a little resuscitation on the restart TS server, and boom, we're back to it. Good. Advanced stuff, eh? Time for advanced stuff. There's more advanced stuff than there is basic stuff, because I like the advanced. We should look at Auto the Rocks' extension first. This is a super duper common one. And we've looked at some beginner stuff. Like we know now how to kind of navigate around and how to autocomplete our way about, how to hover and understand all of the pieces. But what kind of advanced stuff might you be doing in TypeScript? Well, you might have types which call other types. You might have type helpers, type functions in your application, which help you create other types. And you might be working with complicated generic functions. And so having tools that help you debug this kind of logic on the type level is super duper important. And if you don't have it, you can very easily get stuck, and TypeScript can feel harder than it needs to. Quick drink of water, don't go anywhere. You left. What did you do that for? Okay, let's take a look. we're looking at some generic stuff. We're going to look at a Prettify type helper. We're going to be looking at introspecting types you don't control and decomposing types, okay, doing some composting. So imagine that we have this type helper here. This is a type function, right? Doesn't call it that in the TypeScript docs, but that's the term I like to use. Here, we're basically saying, okay, we've got a to uppercase to prefix type helper, and we're passing it an argument. That argument is hello, a string literal hello. And here we're doing the same thing, and we're calling it with passing an argument of goodbye. And we have some results here. How are we going to see those results? Well, we can hover over them, of course. So this seems to be prefixing it with a prefix of prefix, and then uppercasing the thing that we pass to it. So if I pass Matt as well, why not? I just use my own name again, like a narcissist, that's the phrase. Prefix Matt. Seems good. Down here, we've got prefix goodbye. To understand this code, we need to know that, okay, to uppercase with prefix, we have a parameter of t, which extends a string, so it must be a string. And then we pass it into a template literal and call uppercase on it. If I change the prefix here, let's go to suffix, for instance, make that make no sense, then we have suffix hello. But often what I want to do is I want to be able to see the results of all of this stuff while I'm messing about with the type. And for that, we can use a really nice VS Code extension called VSCode 2/queries. What this lets you do is it lets you use a piece of syntax like this, just like that, to basically pull out what you would hover into something that's in line here. And now if I make changes up here and I go, wow, like this, then it's going to be reflected in all of the pieces down here. This is actually available in the TypeScript playground. The TypeScript playground is at typescriptlang.org/play, and it's a really great little tool for sharing bits of TypeScript code with people. So having it here is just wonderful. So now you've understood this code completely back to front, don't lie. Let's go on to more complicated code. This is now mapping kind of the type function that we saw before onto an actual function. This function is called return what I pass in. And this looks a little bit funky. So let's go imagine that we have a result here. So const result equals this. Let's say result 2, result 1. It's going to be kind of tricky because what's happening here is that we have return what I pass in. You have t, which is a type argument. You pass in an arg of t, and then it returns the thing that you passed in. And so in theory, this should be a 1, right? Okay, it's a 1. And this is a 2. Oh, no, it's not a 2. It's a hello. You can see that like we're getting this thing here, and it's the type of it is pulling through into the result. But how does this work actually on the type level? How can I help debug this? Well, if we hover over return what I pass in, this function declaration, we can see that it's got a type argument there. These little curly braces, or not curly braces, angle brackets. And we have the arg, which is t, and it returns t. So the thing that gets inferred in this slot is the thing that's going to get returned. And now, if we hover over return what I pass in, you can actually see the thing that gets inferred here. If I change this, it's going to change here too. How cool is that? Go onto here, and it gets inferred here too. This is maybe the most helpful hover of any, oh man, the amount of times this has just saved me when I'm debugging some really complex stuff. Because you can have more than one generic. I've had functions where you can go up to like 8, 10 generics, and just being able to see all of them in one place and just to hover over their call sites is so cool. And imagine we've got a little bit of a, what looks like a very, very similar function down here, but actually it behaves slightly differently. And that's just because of the way that TypeScript resolves it. We're taking a t, we're putting it in an arg, and then we're returning it in an object which wraps the arg. And so here we can see that if we hover over this, it's not getting inferred as 1, it's actually getting inferred as a number. Down here, it's getting inferred as string instead of hello. And it's doing that for various complicated reasons that I won't bore you with. But just having this ability to hover over this gives us so many more options. Now, let's imagine that we're doing some stuff where we want to just build a set, right? We want a set of unique values. And currently, as you can see, we've got a little query here, and it's showing us as set unknown. That means that if I do const result equals set dot, has, set dot, yeah, let's do set dot for each results or member. Okay. This member is going to be unknown because when we instantiate this set, when we build it out, we're not actually telling TypeScript how, like, what we want this set to be. Let's imagine that we want it to be a set.add string, for instance, like this. So Matt, let's go Olivia, why not? Just for, a bit of mix it up. This member, though, is not actually being inferred as string here. So how do we tell TypeScript that we want this set to be a set of strings? And for instance, this should fail if we just go wanted. Blah, 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 blah. So the way that we would start to look at that is we start by hovering over the set. And here we go. We're getting a little bit more complicated here. Set constructor, new unknown. Okay, so we've got some little curly brackets there. That's a little clue. Iterable, blah, 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 and it returns set unknown. Okay, we know then that this is a little type argument. But to be honest, we're not getting a huge amount of information from this tooltip. What else can we do to help clarify this? Well, we can command click on this set and we go to definition. We can do a go to definition on it. And you can do this as well by right clicking on it and doing a go to definition. There we go. And this shows us all of the places that set is actually declared. We have here two spots. We have an interface set, which appears to take a T. Hello, look at that. And we also have a declare var set. Declare var puts it into the runtime, basically. So this lets us, in our application code, actually use new set as if it were a runtime feature. Interface is just a type, essentially. And you can see that both of these actually take a T. Here we can see set constructor, new T equals any values, blah, 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 set T. This is the call signature of the class because a set is a class, or at least it has a constructor. So what we can see here is that there is a type argument slot that we can fill. You can actually pass this a type of something. And now we can say this is a set of strings. Now, adding Olivia to the set is absolutely fine, but adding a number here is not going to work. And these members, if I do this, let's use these little queries, why not? All of these are going to be strings. So there we go. This combination of hovering, of going into definition, of finding these little hovers just here and pulling them out, making sure that you're debugging correctly, they can save you so much time and it makes you start to feel a bit like a wizard. Let's look at this one. Prettify. Oh. This is not so much a VSCode tip. This is like just a gorgeous, gorgeous TypeScript tip. Let's say you have a type here which is intersected. What it's doing here is we've basically got, okay, a number, which is an object, B string, C Boolean, D number array. If we hover over this, then we're actually going to see that kind of literally spelled out for us. A bunch of different kind of, and this can get really, really ugly as well. You can have just tens and tens of properties in here, some of them like conflicting or, and what we want to do is to be able to basically just turn them into a nice, beautiful structure. The way to do that is with Prettify. And Prettify, what we do is we just wrap this, basically call Prettify with intersected, and we get a beautiful, beautiful little thing here. Type example, a number, B string, C Boolean, D number array. You can do this either, like, don't ask me why this works, but it does seem to work. You can do this with an unknown as well. Thank you, Bishwajit Jar, for showing me this. And it's just so nice. And it's going to come up in our next example. So this is the final one. Let's look at decomposing types. Sometimes when you're doing kind of type level magic, type level logic, you're going to find yourself just doing a lot where you really need to be breaking it down, decomposing it into smaller and smaller pieces. So let's say we've got this. We've got an event here. And let me just zoom out a touch. This is what's called a discriminated union. We have like lots of different possibilities for what this event might be. It could be a click event where you have X and Y. It could be a hover where you have an element. And it could be a scroll here where you have X and Y too. And what we're doing here is we have a little events with prefix type helper. And look at this garbage. Look how much of it is. Oh my days. It's going to be quite tricky for us to actually figure out what's going here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down for you. Because the thing about this is that hovers inside here are a little bit tricky. All we get is type parameter member, get Prettify, emit member type. Oh, good Lord. So our job here is to actually break this down into a format where you should be able to understand this complicated code. What it's doing is it's taking all of the events and it's basically creating a new union out of them and prefixing them with event colon click, event colon scroll, event colon hover. So let's do this now. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to actually take out event type. So type event type is going to be event and then type. This is the true test of my typing skills now. And now what you can see is that we've pulled this out and we can now just observe it and see how it changes as we move forward. And so we've got event type here. Let's just take that out. Event type, lovely. And now what we want to do, let's break this down even further and let's go type events as object. And we're going to say member in events as member type. And let's just say member for now. Now, you might look at this and think, oh God, what's going on here? What's happening is we're creating a new object and we're using what's called a mapped type in order to say for every member in this event, so 1, 2, 3, and then we remap it as member type and we return that specific member. And we get events as objects. We get click, type click, hover, type hover, element, HTML elements. Lovely. So we're getting somewhere. Now, what we could do is we could just like index into that with event type, and we could say event type. And what we end up with is actually the same type that we got back in. So inside here, we can actually do some transformations. And let's say we want to extract this out. So what transformations are we doing right now? Well, we're omitting the member type. So we're omitting the sort of type thing from member. God, I keep saying member and it's sort of disturbing me. And then we're adding in a new attribute where we're saying type event member type. So let's actually extract this out into its own type helper so we can like test it differently. So let's say type add prefix to event. And this thing is going to take in an event, and this is going to extend type string. And what we'll do then is we'll say omit t events, and we'll omit the type, and then we'll add in our brand new type here. So let's grab this, pull this in, and now this is working. So this should be t events. And now, because we've pulled this out, because we've decomposed it, we can now test it separately to all of the other stuff. So we can say type example equals add prefix to event. And let's say we have type something. And now we can see just by hovering this, we have omit type something, type blah, blah, blah. Ooh, it's a complicated intersection. What can we do about those? Let's prettify it. Let's put a little bit of prettier in there. Prettify. Now in our example, we can see that there's a type event something. So we know now that this type helper is going to do the thing that we want it to do. So let's go type something. Let's check that it preserves all the types as well. So X number. Let's try that example. X number is in there. Okay, great. We're off to a great start. So now what we could do is inside here, we could just say add prefix to event doing that. But let's continue with this decomposed version. So now events as objects, all we do is instead of having this member, the full one here, we just go like this. Add prefix to event. Now, events as objects, they have their proper types here. And now, events with prefix, all we need to do is just say events, again, events as object, indexing into them with click, hover, and scroll. And notice how nicely this works when you can pull them out into their own aliases. So you can see every step of the process. So now events with prefix, we get exactly the same result as we had before, but now we've got a reusable type up here. we've got a little that we can sort of test separately. We've got a little hoverable thing here to show the intermediate steps. And finally, we've got just this here, which helps us just get a sense of every single level in this really complicated type signature. Well done, folks, for sticking on with that. That was intense. I've been Matt. I'm like, you can find all my stuff on Twitter. Basically, you can follow me. I'm sure they've got links to all that stuff. I'm so happy that I've been a part of today. It's like, it's so cool to see all the new cool things happening with Visual Studio Code. And I've been using VS Code solidly for about 5 years now, I think. So every update, I'm like, oh, it just feels like Christmas. So thank you so much. And I'm happy to throw it back to Olivia. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was great. We got some magic from the wizard, no wand required.
There you go.
So we have some questions for you today. Thanks so much for diving deep in it. I remember you showed the Orta-Therox extension that can help you work with TypeScript. What are some other VS Code extensions that can help you?
Yeah, so I've got one which is called Total TypeScript, which is it does two things actually. First of all, it kind of translates TypeScript errors for you. TypeScript errors have a reputation for being a little bit hard to read, a bit hard to understand. And so it actually puts them in plain English for you. Sort of, that's just me kind of like writing them out by hand. There's no clever AI stuff going on there, although maybe I could do some clever AI stuff. There's also another one that's come out recently called TS Pretty Errors, which does a similar thing, but just formats them in Markdown really nicely. And so you actually get like a lovely, lovely readout of this TypeScript error, which is just gorgeous. The second thing that the Total TypeScript one does is it actually looks at your TypeScript code and gives you little hints for things that you might not have seen before. So like complicated patterns, interesting stuff. And it then sort of sends you to the correct docs for them. So it's really good for if you're stumbling into a new code base and you're not sure what's going on and you're just like, okay, can I, oh, I see, I know what that is. And you can click like markers learned and then it will just ignore it forever, basically. So it's a good way of developing kind of your own skills with TypeScript at your own pace.
That's great. We were just talking about our TypeScript proficiency and ramping up. I think that would be really helpful when I dive into my TypeScript.
Absolutely. I love the Total TypeScript extension. I was just saying, I would definitely consider myself a novice with TypeScript, and that extension has helped me so much. And like you said, even just getting to see the translation of what an error message is and like put it more in layman's terms so you actually like know what's going on is so helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah. So on that note, can these tips help if you're just working with JavaScript, or is this only relevant with TypeScript?
Good question. So the thing about JavaScript is that the same kind of like TypeScript server that sort of runs in the background for TypeScript also runs on the back end in JavaScript. So whether you're using JavaScript or TypeScript inside VS Code, you're going to benefit from these because TypeScript is looking at your JavaScript code, and the best it can, it's going to try to understand what's going on there. So the autocomplete tips, the hovering, the go to definition, all of those things, if you're trying to figure out like what an API of something is supposed to be, or like how you're supposed to call a function, then using these tips in JavaScript too will give you the same results. So yeah, it's so nice that the TypeScript team has been so generous with, and the VS Code team as well, has been so generous with their, not only their support for TypeScript, but also bringing that, all of this cool tooling over to JavaScript itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a good call because I mean, like we were talking before, a lot of people might have JavaScript background, and then they're like, okay, well, how can I easily translate that into TypeScript? So I think it's a great call to kind of talk about that.
Absolutely. And using that kind of like as a bridge, like using your VS Code skills, your introspection skills to kind of just like make the leap over actually is a really nice way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Matt. It's always so fun hanging out with you. I know we've done a couple of live streams together on the YouTube channel. It's always great energy. Our chat's been going off. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
No worries.